Hello, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're continuing last episode's dive into dreams and diving even deeper into the world of visions and inner sight. So, when you drift towards sleep or slowly wake, you enter a liminal space, a twilight state where consciousness is fluid and unbound by ordinary logic. Psychologists call the fall into sleep hypnagogia and the waking up phase hypnopompia. This in-between state, vivid thoughts and images bubble up, and the mind makes creative connections that our daytime rational brain might never allow. Far from being passive, this groggy, dreamy state can be a rich space of communion, whether that means communion with your subconscious imagination or, for some, a spiritual communion. In fact, many artists and inventors have deliberately tapped into this liminal zone. For instance, Salvador Dali and Thomas Edison famously used their slumber with a key trick, dozing off just long enough to start dreaming, then waking up to capture ideas that flashed by. Recent research backs this up. As little as 15 seconds in this borderland sleep stage made people 3 times more likely to solve a creative problem, showing how the brain in this state enters a highly associative, insight-friendly mode. So in this episode, we're going to explore how visions and inner imagery emerge in such states of stillness, and why that matters. We'll see that the liminal space between waking and sleeping that facilitates inner vision can be achieved by meditation and flow states as well. And by the end, we'll have connected threads from spiritual experiences like biblical visions in contemplative prayer to psychology and neuroscience like dreams and theta brainwaves. The goal here is to recognize that these altered states of consciousness, whether a daydream, a trance, or being in the zone, are valid and meaningful experiences, not just in your head. They serve as windows into the inner world, especially when we cultivate stillness and quiet. So let's dive in. And before we get too deep, let's define by what we mean as visions. The word vision can describe several kinds of inner experiences, ranging from a casual daydream to a profound dream at night. Broadly, we can split them into waking visions and sleeping visions, or dreams. Waking visions are the imaginary and mini-movies that our mind conjures while we're awake. These include daydreams, like those moments where your mind wanders off in class or during a commute and you imagine scenarios and pictures unrelated to your current task. But please don't actually attempt to do that while you're driving. Psychologists note that daydreaming is a universal activity. We spend 30 to 50% of our waking hours in wanderings of the mind. It's not just laziness. Daydreams can be surprisingly productive, because when your mind drifts, it's reorganizing memories and feelings into new images and ideas. Researchers hypothesize that mind wandering actually fuels creativity by allowing existing mental images to recombine in original ways. In other words, letting yourself space out a bit can lead to intuitive flashes of insight or novel solutions to problems. Many of us have experienced an aha moment or a shower thought when our brain was on autopilot. It's like suddenly realizing the answer to a problem while taking a shower or a walk. That form of waking vision is an intuitive flash where an answer appears as a mental image or a gut feeling seemingly out of nowhere. Waking visions can also carry a deeper significance, especially in cultural contexts. Consider practices like vision quests among some indigenous peoples, where solitude and fasting are used to induce meaningful visions. In a way, these are controlled daydreams or trance visions sought for guidance. Even in everyday life, vivid mental imagery can strike when emotion is high. For example, a person anxious about an upcoming event might vividly picture everything going wrong, essentially a waking nightmare generated by stress. Culturally and psychologically, we recognize waking visions as a normal part of consciousness, from the idle imaginative fantasy to the profound mystical vision during prayer. The key that during these moments, though awake, one's attention is tuned inward, and the mind's eye produces images or scenarios like a dream. And sleeping visions, of course, refer to our dreams at night, the wild cinema of the sleeping mind. Everybody dreams, even though we don't always all remember it. From a psychological perspective, dreams are often seen as expressions of our subconscious thoughts and emotions. Freud famously called dreams the royal road to the unconscious. full of hidden wishes and fears in symbolic form. His disciple, Carl Jung, agreed that dreams speak in symbols rather than plain language. Modern research as well finds that dream content frequently refers to a person's waking life emotions and concerns. Continuity theory. For example, during times of anxiety, we tend to have stress dreams, like being chased, lost, or unprepared for an exam, whereas depression might have dreams of emptiness or loss, like losing your teeth. These storylines of dreams might be wildly bizarre, but often the emotional tone of the dreams mirrors how we might feel in waking life. The sleeping brain, in essence, takes our feelings and abstracts them into images and scenarios. As one psychologist put it, dreams are metaphorical representations of our inner psyche. Our brains convert feelings into symbolic pictures. And so from a cultural and spiritual perspective, dreams have long been considered more than random nonsense. Many ancient and indigenous cultures viewed dreams as messages from the spirit world or visits to other realms. Traditional societies often treated dreams as portals to a spirit world, gaining religious insight or wisdom from these nightly visions. The Bible and other religious texts, of course, are full of pivotal dreams, like Joseph dreaming of a future famine, or the wise men warned in a dream to avoid Herod. In Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, and beyond, we see the idea that something divine can speak through dreams. Even today, some people consider certain dreams as spiritual guidance or intuitions about their life. Science tends to explain dreams in terms of memory processing and brain activity, but it's fascinating that across history, humans have ascribed meaning to that nightly theater of the mind. Whether we lean scientific or spiritual, we can agree that dreams do carry signals from within us, often using creative imagery to communicate. They're inner visions by night, complementing the waking visions that our mind generates by day. Visions are deeply woven into religious history. In the Bible, for instance, we find accounts of people falling into trance-like states and receiving vivid visions believed to be messages from God. Let's look at a couple of notable examples from the New Testament. In the book of Acts, chapter 10, the Apostle Peter experiences a dramatic vision while praying. The scene is around noon on a rooftop in Joppa. Peter is hungry as lunch is being prepared, and he prays and falls into a trance, indicating that he was awake but in an altered state of consciousness. Not a normal, fully alert state, but not fully asleep either. In this trance, Peter sees the sky opening up and something like a great sheet descend, containing all kinds of animals. Many of these animals are unclean by Jewish dietary law. Peter then hears a voice telling him, "Rise, Peter, kill and eat." Surprised, he objects, saying that he has never eaten anything impure. The voice replies, "Do not call anything impure that God has made clean," in Acts 10:15. This vision and dialogue repeat 3 times for emphasis, and then Peter snaps out of the trance perplexed. So what was going on here? On the surface, it's about food. But Peter soon realizes that it's really about people. Right after his visions, messengers arrive from a Gentile man named Cornelius, asking Peter to come and share the gospel. Peter, a Jewish Christian, had considered Gentiles and their food unclean, but the vision's message was that God had opened the way to all people. Peter later explains that the vision taught him he should not call anyone impure or unclean. In other words, the trance on the rooftop was a divine vision telling Peter that the old barriers were down. Non-Jews were welcome in the new faith, and even the old dietary restrictions no longer applied. This was a revelation based on real events in his waking life that transformed the early Christian movement, allowing it to spread beyond the Jewish community. For our purpose, let's note how Peter received this message. He was in prayer, likely quiet, receptive when he fell into the trance. The author makes a point of saying that this wasn't a regular dream, which happens, of course, in sleep, but a vision while awake. And so in that altered state, symbolic imagery, the sheet of animals, conveyed a meaning that Peter had to ponder. It's a classic example of a religious altered state brought on during meditation and prayer, containing vivid symbolic context and perceived communication from God. And in our second example, the Apostle Paul describes another kind of visionary experience, and a mysterious one. In Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, he writes about a man in Christ who 14 years earlier was caught up to the third heaven. Spoiler alert, he's talking about himself, but humbly in the third person. Paul says this person was snatched up to paradise and heard inexpressible things that no one is permitted to tell. Importantly, he adds whether it was an experience in the body or apart from the body. He doesn't know. Only God knows. In plain terms, Paul isn't sure if he was physically taken somewhere or if it was purely a spiritual experience. He just knows it happened. The third heaven in ancient Jewish cosmology refers to the divine realm. The first heaven is the sky, the second is outer space, the third beyond that, essentially God's dwelling. The inner man. So Paul is claiming he was taken into God's realm and given glimpses of heavenly mysteries, but he doesn't describe what he saw in detail, only that he heard things that he can't repeat. This brief account is tantalizingly vague, but it's clear Paul sees it as a genuine revelation, validating his authority. He mentions it among his visions and revelations from the Lord. What's fascinating is Paul's emphasis is the experience was indescribable and felt out of body. He literally says that twice he can't tell if he was in his body or not. Modern researchers can recognize that this is a hallmark of an ecstatic trance. One commentary notes, no words better capture the trance state. Normal awareness of the body and surrounding fades, so afterwards the person may truly wonder if their spirit traveled elsewhere or if it was in a vision in the mind. Paul's uncertainty and awe convey how altered his consciousness was during the event. He experienced something real to him, yet completely outside of ordinary experience, so much so that normal categories, awake, asleep, mental, physical, completely broke down. Early Christians like Paul and Peter lived in a world where such visionary trances were accepted as a part of spiritual life. And later we'll get into Greek philosophy and how that influenced early Christianity, and we'll see more of why this type of spiritual practice was highly influential as a part of that daily life. And so both of these are excellent examples of altered states of consciousness in a religious context. Both cases, the person was in a state of intense focused prayer, deep reflection when the vision occurred. In Peter's case, he was awake in a trance. Paul doesn't even know which state he was in, which could imply he could have been awake in a trance, or it might have occurred during a dream, like ecstasy. In fact, through religious history, many visionaries and mystics have had similar experiences. An observer in the 1800s noted that countless figures from ancient Greece to philosophers and Christian saints, Sufi mystics and shamans have all entered at times abnormal states of ecstasy as a routine part of their spiritual life. These trance states share common features. The person becomes oblivious to the outside world and experiences rich imagery or revelations, and afterwards might struggle to put it into words. The key takeaway is that the Bible recognized trances and visions as genuine modes of spiritual experiences rather than dismissing a vision as just an imagination. The text treats it as a legitimate channel for truth, which is the discernment that true visions align with God's message. Today, we might analyze Peter or Paul's state in neurological terms, but within the narrative that they exemplify how stillness, focus, and prayer can alter consciousness, bridging human and divine communication. These stories encourage us to see the liminal, dreamlike states not just as mindless potential, but meaningful and transformative. Shifting from ancient spiritualist accounts to modern science. So what's happening in the brain during these inner states? One key player is the theta brainwaves. Brainwaves are the electrical rhythms of the brain, measurable by EEG. When we are wide awake and alert, we are mostly in beta frequency, fast, busy brain activity. But as we relax or enter meditation, and especially as we approach sleep, the brain's dominant rhythm slows down. Theta waves, which oscillate about 4 to 8 times per second, start to take over. Theta is particularly interesting here because it's literally the brainwave of the liminal state. Neuroscientists classify theta as rhythm of the state between wakefulness and sleep, closely linked to the subconscious mind. In adults, lots of theta during normal waking is unusual, might indicate drowsiness or distraction. But in children, theta activity is perfectly normal and prominent. Ever notice how kids slip into pretend worlds so easily? Theta shows up strongly during dreamly, internal focus states. For instance, during meditation, prayer, or intense creativity, the brain often produces more theta waves. It's also abundant during REM sleep, the dream stage, and light sleep. Essentially, theta marks that we've turned inward. The brain is less focused on the external environment and more tuned into emotions, memories, and imagery. Research has found that theta-rich states correlate with some remarkable effects. Theta is associated with creativity, intuition, daydreaming, and fantasizing. It's as if when the brain shifts into theta, our thought processes become less linear and more fluidly imaginative. And this makes sense. Remember that hypnagogic state when falling asleep, which overflows with random images and creative ideas? That's the theta dominant state. In theta, the brain also accesses buried memories and feelings more easily. In fact, the limbic system, the emotional brain, including the hippocampus and oblongata, is thought to be involved in generating theta rhythms. Little wonder that theta is linked to abstract imagery and symbolic thinking. It's literally tapping into the emotional and memory centers and expressing that actively in a free-flowing, non-rational way. Subjectively, being in a theta state often feels dreamlike, intuitive, and in the zone. People may experience vivid image pictures, creative flashes, or even a sense of oneness with their thoughts. Ever have that highway hypnosis where you're driving on autopilot and your mind is elsewhere visualizing scenarios, like we mentioned earlier, and said please don't do? That is a mild theta state. Not great for driving, but it shows how theta brings imagery. Elite athletes, master musicians, and chess grandmasters have been found to produce bursts of theta when they're performing at their peak. It's associated with that deep flow state of total focus and immersion. Likewise, advanced meditators show strong theta activity during deep meditation. It appears that theta bridges the conscious and the subconscious. One neuroscience article poetically called theta waves the bridge between your conscious and subconscious minds. So what does this mean for visions? It implies that when you are in your half-awake liminal zone or meditative state, your brain is literally in a different gear, theta, which primes you for inner sight. In theta, you're more likely to get mental images, creative associations, or spiritual sensations that aren't accessible in normal waking beta life. Even a light meditation that increases theta can let subconscious ideas bubble up as vivid symbols. So it's no wonder that hypnagogic state is so fertile for problem solving and creative ideas. The brain in theta connects distant dots and isn't constrained by logic. From a spiritual angle, one could say that theta is the brain rhythm that opens the door to visions, trance, and mystical experiences. It's when the analytical mind quiets down and the intuitive, image-driven mind takes the stage. To put it more simply, theta is the rhythm of inner stillness and vision. It's not an accident that prayer, meditation, dreaming, and creative flow, despite being very different activities, share a common neurological signature in theta waves. So the next time you feel yourself entering drowsy, imaginative haze during prayer or just before sleep, or at your desk, remember, your brain is likely humming in theta, and you're biologically stepping into a state where inner imagery can thrive. In our loud, information-flooded world, inner visions and subtle insights often get drowned out. That's why it's called the still, quiet voice. Stillness and solitude are increasingly rare, yet they're exactly what nurture our inner sight. So when was the last time you sat in quiet? No phone, no TV, no chatter, just alone with your thoughts. For many of us, myself included, constant stimulation is the norm, and not having that, teensy bit scary. Sensory overload becomes a habit. But while our devices and busy lives flood our senses, our minds are starving for quiet. Spending time in silence is crucial for mental well-being, and it's a fertile ground where visions, intuition, and self-discovery sprout. Psychologically, solitude has many benefits. When we minimize external distractions, turn off screens, step away from crowds, our concentration and productivity improve after the quiet period. This isn't just about getting cool visions. The brain gets a chance to rest. More importantly, silence lets us hear ourselves. One author noted, "It's amazing what you can learn about yourself when you spend time with your own mind." In practical terms, solitude enables deeper introspection. Without the noise, you begin to notice subtle signals inside, the emotions that you pushed aside, the creative ideas whispering in the back of your head, the intuitive nudges. Quiet solitude boosts creativity and facilitates problem solving because it gives the mind space to digest and recombine information. This is very much like allowing a waking vision to emerge. You need a calm pond for the reflections to be clear. If life is a constant hurricane of input, you will hardly perceive that still small voice within. There's even psychological perks to quiet time. Research indicates that spending time in silence lowers stress hormones and blood pressure, and it even stimulates brain growth in areas related to memory. Emotionally, people who cultivate solitude show better emotional regulation and self-awareness. Why? Because in silence, you can actually process your feelings rather than just react to everything all of the time. It's akin to giving your soul breathing room. In a quiet setting, you might finally acknowledge that you're sad about something, or realize a solution to a problem that's been making you secretly anxious, or discover how to solve your daily anxiety. That's one of the reasons why trends like bed rotting are a trend, is because our minds and our feeds are so overstimulating that it's literally all we can do to just bed rot. Literally getting out of our day is the extra overstimulus because we're already so crowded and bombarded with noise. Solitude is restorative. It calms the nervous system and lets the mind integrate your experiences. From a spiritual or contemplative standpoint, almost all traditions emphasize solitude or profound insight. Monastics withdraw into silence to seek God. Jesus, Buddha, and Muhammad, and many other spiritual figures spent time alone in deserts or mountains before returning with powerful visions or teachings. In contemplative prayer, Christians sit in silence, repeating a sacred word or simply resting in God's presence. The stillness is meant to open deeper communication beyond words. Similarly, meditation retreats in Buddhism, like a 10-day silent Vipassana retreat, impose silence and isolation so one can observe the mind's reality without distraction. Initially, that can be challenging, even uncomfortable. When external noise quiets, the internal noise of thoughts can seem even louder. And if you're like me, your inner world is always a buzz. Sometimes it feels like the outside world, even though it's extremely overstimulating, is less stimulating than what's going on up here. But after a while, people report that time in silence, the mind becomes clear and sensitive. They might experience vivid memories or creative imagery, or in a religious context, a sense of divine presence. It's as if our brains, when deprived of external input, compensate by amplifying internal signals, an effect noted in neuroscience as well. If you remove one sensory input, the others heighten. So during a silent retreat, for example, some individuals have even reported quasi-visionary states like extremely lucid thoughts or dreamlike sensations while awake. It's not necessarily supernatural, it's the mind. It's finally unhindered, doing what it's naturally supposed to do: create, process, and reveal your inner content. In short, solitude and quiet are the gateway to inner stillness. By cutting the noise, you tune into yourself. Modern psychology confirms that quiet solitude is essential. It enhances creativity, self-knowledge, and even our physical health. So if you're seeking that liminal visionary state, the surest path is to be still. And as the old biblical verse says, "Be still and know that I am God." So whether one interprets that spiritually or psychologically, the message is the same. Stillness, truth reveals itself. Our fast-paced lives make stillness hard, but reclaiming even a few seconds of that quiet a day is a powerful practice. Inner sight needs inner silence to surface, so making space for solitude is a gift to your mind and to your soul. We often think of dreams as purely visual, but emotion is the invisible director behind so many of our inner images. If you've ever woken from a dream that left you in a particular mood, scared, joyful, or sad, even if the dream's storyline made little sense, that's a clue. The feeling or vision behind a dream is a key to understanding it. There's a saying from Jungian psychology, attributed to analyst Marie-Louise von Franz, that captures this well. The brain abstracts feelings into images. In other words, our minds take raw emotion and convert them into symbolic imagery from our inner experiences. A dream is often like a movie of your emotions. If you go to bed worried about something, your anxiety might not appear as the word worry on a screen. Instead, you might dream of giving a speech in front of a large crowd, or doing that in your birthday suit. It's a classic fear symbol. Or missing an important flight. The brain has taken that worry and dramatized it into a picture story that conveys feeling. If you're grieving a loss, you might dream of searching for something or seeing the person that you lost alive again, expressing yearnings and sorrow visually. Psychologists point out that dream content often reflects the dreamer's underlying emotional conflicts, just in a coded way. The images are like mirrors going on what's inside emotionally. In fact, one chapter of research is literally titled Relating Dream Imagery to Dreamers' Underlying Emotion, because studies find strong links between central images of a dream and the dreamer's emotional state or personality traits. Dreams speak the language of the subconscious, which is largely emotion and metaphor. This principle applies not only to nighttime dreams, but also to waking visionary experiences, and even day-to-day imagination. For example, an artist might paint abstract shapes and later realize that the colors and forms perfectly captured how they felt internally. A person in prayer might have a mental image of light or warmth that corresponds to a feeling of love or peace in that moment. Our brain-mind system is inherently symbolic. It often processes feelings by generating images. One therapist quipped that if our logical mind spoke in prose, then our emotional mind speaks in poetry and pictures. Understanding this can deepen how we interpret our vision. Instead of taking an image at face value, we ask, what feeling does this image carry? For instance, if someone keeps getting a mental image during a meditation of a vast ocean, it could symbolize a feeling of overwhelm or freedom, depending on that person's context. For instance, I don't have thalassophobia. I would feel it probably more as freedom, maybe lost. But my fiance might feel that as overwhelm or fear because he does have thalassophobia. The image is the brain's way of giving form to feeling. Neuroscience finds that during REM sleep, when vivid dreaming happens, the emotional centers like the amygdala are highly active, while the parts of the prefrontal cortex, the logic center, are relatively dampened. So the brain at night is literally primed to emote and visualize, rather than to think linearly. So this leads to dreams that can be emotionally intense and visually striking, and sometimes bizarre in their sequence. The story is coming from your emotional memory regions mixing with your visual cortex activity. So, what about visions in spiritual contexts? Often, strong emotions are involved there too. The ecstasy of the saint's vision, the collective fervor of group prayer, etc. And emotions like devotion, fear, or euphoria can trigger inner imagery. A dramatic example is that in times of extreme grief, some bereaved people actually see or hear their loved one briefly, a phenomenon known as bereavement vision or bereavement hallucination. Studies show that these are surprisingly common. About 1/3 of elderly widows and widowers report seeing or speaking to their late spouse at least one time in their grief. This shows how crushing emotion can produce a compelling inner vision of the person that they yearn for. The brain in grief is generating that image as a way to cope, momentarily soothe that emotional pain. To the individuals, it feels very real and very comforting. While skeptics might label it a hallucination, another perspective is that it's the mind's attempt to reconcile intense feelings through a sensory image. The implication of brain abstracting feelings into images is that to decode our visions, whether dreams, meditative visuals, or imaginative flashes, we should pay attention to the emotions inside of them. If you get a sudden mental image during prayer or intuition, what emotion is accompanying it, or what does it invoke? This is a big clue to its meaning. Likewise, if you're trying to cultivate inner visions, say in active imagination or visualization exercises, knowing that emotion is the fuel can help. You might deliberately infuse the practice with feeling. For example, visualizing a healing image while feeling love or compassion so that the image becomes extra powerful. It's the salt of emotion. In summary, our inner sight is intimately tied to our heart. Visions aren't cold, cynical pictures, they're living symbols of how we feel. By recognizing this, we can better understand and interpret experiences like dreams that dramatize these unresolved feelings and appreciate the wisdom in our own subconscious. Emotions give visions their color. Emotions give visions their color, intensity, and in turn, visions give emotions forms to communicate with us. It's a beautiful loop. Feeling fuels imagery, and imagery can in turn spark feeling. That's why both artists and therapists pay close attention to the images that arise from within. They are usually rich with emotional meaning, a direct line to what's going on inside of us. Now, have you ever been so absorbed in something that you lose track of time? I have. Maybe while playing music, writing, surfing, coding, doing art, or even praying. You found yourself in the zone where everything flows. That's what psychologist
me high, Csikszentmihalyi
famously termed the flow state, and it's another facet of our inner experience that links to our topic. Flow is typically described in secular terms, like in sports or art, but intriguingly, it shares the same qualities with meditative and trance states. It's essentially a positive, altered state of consciousness attained through full immersion in an activity. When you're in flow, several things happen. Action and awareness merge. You have clear focus, and feedback is immediate. Perhaps the most striking feature is the altered perception of time. Hours can pass in what feels like minutes, or occasionally, time might seem to slow down at a critical moment. For example, an athlete might describe that during a perfect play, everything went into slow-mo, subjectively, and they felt no pain or fatigue until after. In deep flow, people often forget their bodily needs, hunger, aches, even the need to use the bathroom, because their mind is elsewhere, so to speak. They often report a sense of effortless control. You're not forcing anything, yet everything seems together flawlessly. As one description puts it, ordinary thinking quiets, intuition takes over, and it feels as if you're being gently carried by a force yourself. Now, I have definitely experienced this. I am right-hand dominant, technically ambidextrous, and when I draw and get into this flow state, my intuition just takes over, and if I'm tired or my hand is hurting, I don't ever notice that. I just start drawing with my left hand. So my intuition has just completely taken over, and then the next thing I know, I'll be looking down and like, oh, I'm drawing with my left hand. Huh, that's fascinating. And that feeling on the spiritual side has previously been given terms like ecstasy or rapture to describe essentially the same state. The word inspiration itself comes from the Latin inspirare, meaning to breathe into, or from the Greek entheos, or God within, implying being filled with a divine breath. In a deep flow state, people often feel unity with what they're doing, sometimes even a unity with all things, which is a powerful transcendent sense of connection. So how do you get into flow? Usually by doing something challenging yet enjoyable, something that requires your full concentration. Athletes, artists, and gamers know the little tricks to trigger flow. A pre-performance routine, a focus technique, etc. For me, it's just getting in, doing it, and focusing on it. Interestingly, many ancient practices aimed at spiritual ecstasy are basically flow induction methods. Throughout history, humans have discovered a variety of ways to shift consciousness similarly to flow. Music, dance, chanting, ritual, prayer, fasting, sensory deprivation, isolation, extreme exertion, and I'm sure you can think of a few others that I can't mention on YouTube. All of these have been used to induce flow-like or trance states. If you think about a group of people drumming and dancing in a circle for hours, chanting until they reach a euphoric trance, or people in a congregation worshiping until tears are streaming down their face and they're having these visions and speaking in tongues, that is a flow state through rhythmic activity. A hermit fasting and praying alone in a cave may also enter an altered state. Hunger and fatigue contribute, but the deep focus on prayer does as well. In fact, fasting is a common thread in vision quests and religious rites. precisely because physical deprivation can alter your perception. It might make you lightheaded, sure, but it can also produce clarity or even hallucinations as the body and mind shift gears. Even Christ fasted in the wilderness for 40 days and had a vision. Satan appeared to him and tempted him. He had a vision. Intense grief or emotion can push someone into one of these quasi-altered states. Earlier we mentioned bereavement visions. So think of a grieving person who in deep sorrow sits gazing at nothing for hours. To them, it might feel like minutes have passed, or someone who, in a moment of extreme crisis, suddenly feels calm focus and sees things with unusual clarity. Some describe this sense of time slowing during accidents or trauma. These are the mind's way of modulating perception under extreme conditions. Grief, in particular, often involves a kind of withdrawal from normal reality, disassociation. People often report feeling like they're in a bubble, or the world isn't right after a loss. That's an altered state induced by emotional shock. And occasionally, as noted, it tips into outright visions, like seeing the deceased. So while flow is typically a joyful, sought-after state, the parallel alterations of perception that occur through pain or passion as well. So why lump in prayer, grief, and fasting together here? Because all three can profoundly change how we perceive reality in the moment. In deep prayer or worship, especially in communal settings, individuals might enter a trance state of devotion, losing sense of time and surroundings, much like flow, and even experience visions or voices internally. Grief, as discussed, can momentarily thin the veil between the conscious and the subconscious, or perhaps, in a spiritual sense, between the living world and the beyond, leading to perceptions that others might not see. Fasting, beyond its health aspects, has been used in nearly every spiritual tradition as a way to heighten inner perception. The discomfort and simplicity it brings often shifts one's consciousness towards inner awareness. And so what's common in all of these cases, be it happy flow making music, fervent prayer, or harrowing grief, is the usual everyday mode of perception is altered. Psychologists would call these altered states of consciousness. And we might experience transient hypofrontality, a temporary downward shift in the executive brain, which results in the feeling of being present, open, and connected, rather than analytical and separate. And that's why in flow or deep meditation, we often feel at one with the activity or the universe. The part of the brain that delineates you from the world is subdued. Time perception, the sense of self, and sensory awareness can all change. And these alterations open up the door to non-ordinary experiences, like vision-like imagery, extraordinary insights, or a sense of the sacred. Flow states, trances, and other altered states broaden our perception beyond the ordinary. They allow us to see aspects of our reality and ourselves that we normally miss. So whether induced by doing something that we love, by practicing spiritual disciplines, or by undergoing intense emotional trials, these states tend to quiet the noise of trivial thoughts and bring what truly matters into focus. In flow or ecstasy, people describe a feeling of truth and unity, noticing details and patterns that weren't obvious before or intuitively solving problems, as if the mind is tapping into a wider awareness. Some even call flow a lucid waking dream, where you navigate reality with the same fluid creativity as a dream. And from what I have researched, I would also classify flow as a lucid waking dream. And indeed, science finds that in deep flow, the brain shows a blend of alpha and theta waves, relaxed yet deeply focused, very much like that meditative state and the moments just before sleep. Meaning that flow isn't just a metaphorical cousin of a liminal dream state. It's a literal biological cousin too, sharing brain patterns associated with insight and inner imagery. So to sum up, all of these things, and any intense focus or emotion, can all induce shifts in consciousness that bring about inner visions and profound realizations. We've journeyed through a lot of territory, from defining waking daydreams and night dreams to biblical trances, brainwaves, solitude, emotion, and flow. But all of these threads weave together in a coherent picture. That altered states of consciousness are a natural and meaningful part of human life. They're not weird, they're not unproductive, they don't make you lazy. They play a crucial role in our conscious evolution, in creativity, in healing, in spiritual growth, in emotional processing. Visions, trances, flow, dreams, these are all ways that our mind connects different parts of ourselves together, and some would say connect us with something beyond ourselves. They thrive on stillness, on letting go of the constant external focus and chatter. In these states, people throughout history have felt that they could communicate with the divine, uncover deep truths, or simply perform at their very best. Modern science might explain the mechanisms like theta waves or hypofrontality, but it doesn't diminish the value of that experience. In essence, stillness is the conduit for inner sight. When we find stillness, whether through prayer or in a quiet chapel, meditation on a cushion, a walking meditation alone in the woods, or losing ourselves in a beloved hobby, we activate a different mode of conscious exploration. In that mode, visions can come, creative or spiritual. We can solve problems in a flash of intuition, or we might feel images and insight arising from a deeper well. And so here, bridging the spiritual, psychological, and neurological isn't forced. We're describing the same phenomenon in different languages. A Christian might say the Holy Spirit gave them a vision in silent prayer. A psychologist might say his brain relaxed into theta and his subconscious presented an answer via imagery. And an artist might say he entered a flow state, granting access to nonlinear cognition. All true in each of their frameworks and all pointing to the singular fact that there are states of mind where we go beyond our ordinary waking limitations of reality. By embracing these states as valid, we can integrate them into a healthy life. That might mean keeping a dream journal and noting emotional themes, or making time daily for quiet reflection to see what bubbles up, or practicing a craft or sport with such presence that you touch flow regularly. It could also mean simply giving yourself grace when life thrusts you into an altered state, like intense grief. Understand that it's a natural process, and maybe listen for what the experience reveals. Visions, stillness, and inner sight all go hand in hand. Stillness, whether the little quiet of a calm and focused flow, is the incubator. Visions and inner sight are the experiences that hatch, showing us things in metaphor and feeling that linear thinking might miss. And this is something that will enhance your life. Many great scientific discoveries, works of art, and spiritual epiphanies have come from these subtle states. Think of Einstein's daydreams leading to relativity, his thought experiments, or religious prophets' visions guiding communities. Liminal spaces and focused awareness allow us to see ourselves and our world with fresh eyes, sometimes like from a higher vantage point. So whether you approach it through prayer, meditation, or creative daydreaming, or just savoring your moments of solitude, I encourage you to honor those liminal, flowing states. They are truly windows into the inner world. In them, we remember that life isn't all about the external hustle. There's a richer landscape always there, waiting in the stillness. Visions and your inner sight are gifts from that landscape, offering wisdom, healing, and innovation. Bridging the spiritual, psychological, and neurological views, we come to a simple conclusion, that when we allow ourselves to be still, we awaken to deeper dimensions of truth. In the quiet and in the in-between, there is vision. And that inner sight and that inner wisdom can light up not only our own path, but potentially the world around us as well. Because insights born in stillness often carry clarity and compassion that busy minds have a hard time mastering. So that wraps it up for today. As always, sources are in the channel bio. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell like the winners that you are, and I will see you next time.